Welcome all. I want to let you know that this session will be recorded and available for viewing at pta.org/learninglabs. Welcome to PTA's Learning Lab series, an online educational series dedicated to helping parents, families, and PTA leaders. We are very excited to have Thermo Fisher Scientific joining us today to talk about COVID-19 testing in schools and how we can help keep kids, teachers, and staff healthy this school year. Learning labs are opportunities for families to get tangible takeaways and tips from experts in the field. Learning labs are not sponsored sessions, and National PTA does not endorse any commercial entity, product, or service. No endorsement of sponsored companies is implied. Today, Mara Espinal, professor of practice at Biomedical Diagnostics at Arizona State University and managing director of Health Catalyst Group, and Rachel Formosa, senior director of marketing development from Thermo Fisher Scientific, will be leading the discussion on the current COVID-19 landscape, the potential risks posed to children, and solutions that can help keep your children out of harm's way and focused on learning in the classroom this year. Thank you, Rachel and Mara, for joining us today. Don't forget, you can ask questions in the QA or chat box during the session. There will be a Q&A session after Mara and Rachel's presentation today. So I'll let you all take it away. Thank you.
Morning. Rachel, I'll start?
Yes, yeah, I think you have the slides, so if you want to just share those. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, and it is great to be here with everyone. And as we just said, this is really going to be, we're hoping for it to be a real interactive session. Rachel and I will go through the deck and talk about why K through 12 testing is so important. But what we want to be able to do is answer your questions. So we'll go through a few slides and then come back and have the chance to really have an interaction and discussion. Along the way, we will have several polls. They're all anonymous. And so, but we'd love you to answer it so everyone can better understand the group that we're here, and we can focus the discussion and questions on that. So with that, thank you for the nice introduction. It is terrific to be here. I will say, as was said, I've spent 25 years in the diagnostics industry and really fundamentally believe you can't treat disease, you can't understand what's happening without the power of diagnostics. So what am I going to talk about today? And please interrupt if I'm going too fast or you have a question along the way, put it in the chat or just come off mute and ask me so we can make this as interactive and as interesting as possible. What I prepared an agenda of 4 aspects, what I call the good, bad, and ugly, sort of this executive summary. Second, let's look back to say what happened last semester, and let's look forward to see what needs to happen this semester. And lastly, but absolutely critically, and if nobody does understand this and you don't have the information, we'll share some fundamental information about school funding options. And I'm very happy to say that there should be no school that can't find funding for testing if they want to go forward. So let me start with the good, bad, and the ugly. The good is that 60% of US adults are vaccinated, and that's going up every day. As of May, the CDC estimated 80% for teachers. 12 to 17-year-olds, 35%, and that the vaccines are highly effective, especially against serious disease. So that is the great. I will say, just a few weeks ago, the other good was cases are down, but we now know that that's the bad. Cases are up from last summer, and we know that Delta is driving further increases. I'm going to estimate 40% of adults and kids are not fully vaccinated today. Mitigation measures, now this is changing with Delta, but there are still a lot of states, and I'll talk about this, that are not using it. And we know that for most schools, they won't be using physical distancing. To be fair, it's not clear that it's helpful, but it's important to recognize. And we know that the Delta variant is more transmissible. A shorter pre-symptomatic period. There is some good news there now, is it does appear that vaccinated people who do get a breakthrough case of Delta are contagious and infectious for a much shorter period of time. So a little bit of good news. What's the ugly? Well, number one, all viruses mutate. The longer the pandemic goes on, the more mutations could happen. Now, they've gotten more dangerous along the way. It's possible that they get less dangerous, but the reality is, and we can't change this, all viruses mutate. The second piece that's unique to COVID-19 is that a very big percent of cases are asymptomatic. Again, you're probably familiar with that. So let's go through the data. But as we start this, I wanted to understand where you are. How concerned are you about your children getting exposed? And a poll just popped up. And thank you for answering the poll. Everyone can see the numbers that are coming in. So we'll really see in real time what the issue is. And so far, I think we're seeing the vast majority of the people, 85%, saying they're very concerned or extremely concerned. Okay, we're going to go on now to the next question. I think our summary here is that for people who did the poll, 85% are either very or extremely concerned. Now we'll go on to the next slide, and we have a second poll. And in our second poll, we see, does the Delta variant make you nervous to send your kids to school? A much simpler answer, yes or no. Not surprisingly, the vast majority, still about 85%, say that does make them nervous. So you can see those poll results right there. Again, roughly 85-15. Thank you. So let's now go on, and in the context of the Delta variant, the reason we put the question there is, again, you're probably familiar, I'll go through this quickly. How do we get variants? How do they happen? Well, if you look at the DNA of the RNA, basically the base pairs, what you see is if a single base pair changes, it's no big deal. They're often coding for the same protein. But what happens is, instead of UUU, it becomes UUC. Then it becomes, instead of AAC, CAC. This becomes a big deal, and a new variant is born. But sometimes they're relevant, sometimes they're not. I'll call green variant of note, doesn't seem to make anything worse. Variant of interest, it's growing, we need to look at it. Variant of concern is when it hits a lot of the population. And now we have alpha, beta, gamma, and delta. The reason we're skipped now to lambda is that several others of the letters have been used, including epsilon, which was called a variant of interest and now no longer interesting. So we took up the letter, but we're going on to the next ones, which are lambda. What does it look like? I thought this would be an interesting, it's colored, but it's an actual photograph of SARS-CoV-2. And as you can see here, those spikes, not surprisingly, called spike proteins. That's why this is so effective. The mutations are on the spike, and literally those spikes, as you can imagine, it's sort of like Velcro. When they get into the body, they attach to other cells and they move just like this. So the 5 questions that need to be asked when you have a variant are these 5. I won't read through them in detail, but you can see it doesn't, a few tests are less accurate, but all of the EUA tests are completely accurate. And so that's really in theory. It does unfortunately increase cases and death. Some treatments are less effective, mostly antibody treatments from recovered people. If you get an antibody from somebody who had the alpha mutation, it doesn't work on somebody that has delta. Vaccine effectiveness somewhat, and we'll talk about that, and unfortunately raises the hurdle for herd immunity. So I thought it was useful to see the picture. So if we take that, we say, why is everybody concerned? Well, why Delta just was so much faster. Alpha became more than 50% in 3 months. Delta became more than 50%, actually up to 90% in 1 month. It just moves faster than the other mutations we had seen. So that's the first piece of the ugly. The second piece is asymptomatic. And what you see here and on your right, about 40 studies that looked at what percent of people are completely and totally asymptomatic. don't even feel like they have a cold, going about their day. And this is what's depressing a lot of people. The lowest is 19%, and it goes up to as much as 60%. Personally, what I have said is between 40 and 50%, and I use in my calculations of people that are completely asymptomatic. So that gives you a sense of the good, the bad, and the ugly. What did this impact for schools? Well, at the end of last semester, we want to know, well, I'm going to go back and then go to the survey in a minute. The end of last semester, we found 70% of schools were traditional, meaning 5 days a week. Hybrid were just under 30, and only virtual were just 2%. So as we look at that, and you know what we're going through now, can we go through the next polling question to say, what is the plan for your children in the fall of 2021? Now, some of you may be mostly on the West, where schools have already started. Oh, I have to say, I'm pleased to see this, that some of others maybe don't have kids in school, that we are 90%. We're back to maybe about 85% planning to send your children back to school. Now, clearly, this question combines the question of what your plans are as parents and what the local school is doing. So thank you for that. We'll now move on to continue the discussion. You know this better than I do, but to give you a sense of the whole country, the darker burgundy here are showing schools, districts that are 5 days a week. The lighter colors are hybrid or virtual. California as a state and Maine have the smallest percent of in-person, but this was how we ended up last semester. So where do we go from here? I'm going to talk about 3 pieces: vaccination, mitigation, confirmation. That, I think, is the key. So when we're talking about vaccination, what is your plan for your children to be vaccinated when they're eligible? And again, 3 choices. You'll see the poll pop up. And I see a comment in the chat, are rates climbing so much that the district may have to go back to hybrid? I'm going to assume that that is happening in a lot of places. And again, we have about 85% saying yes, and then 7% no, and rather not disclose. So that gives us, again, a sense of where people are thinking, a little bit higher than the national average. Next poll. If not, do you plan to have your children vaccinated when they're eligible? It's kind of overlapping with the last question. So, Krista, if it's okay, I'm going to skip that and move forward.
Go ahead.
So, well, we got the answers there, and it took a little while to come up on mine. So it's 92%. So it looks like we're between 85 and 92% in general for people to both go back to school and get vaccinated. So in my 3-point plan, I think about those vaccinations, number 1, when possible, mitigations, number 2. And I'd love each of you to give me some feedback here. But what we've seen from mitigations are these 6 things: health checks, respiratory etiquette, teaching kids, how to sneeze, hand washing, and classroom, making it cleaner. There are not a lot of people, I think, who are disagreeing with this on the top 3. They're not all easy to do, especially in older school buildings, but most everybody agrees with it. Ken, you had a question? Was there a question from Ken? Okay, you may be on mute, Ken, but we'll come back to you. The following 3 are very challenging. And in particular, masking. And I do see a question about air purification systems. I'll answer that now and keep it going as a conversation. From my perspective, there are three ways to look at air purification systems. One is a fundamentally new system in your schools, similar to what the airlines did. It's typically expensive. The good news is the federal government has just allowed more money to be spent on doing that. Those work if they are appropriately rated HEPA filters, and truly it's all about how quickly the air exchange happens. So just putting in a new air conditioning system may not do it. It's important to know the frequency of air handling and air exchange. Secondly, the second kind of system are fans and blowers and filters in the classroom. I'm cautious about this because some of them work, some of them just move around a virus and actually may make things worse if somebody has it and that it's moving from the front to the back of the room and back. What I would suggest is if you're thinking about that, make sure you get somebody who's a professional here and ask those questions about how much air exchange is actually happening as a result of it. And is the air just moving from front to back, which typically back to front, excuse me, typically does not help, but that it's actually exchanging the air and filtering it. The third is an air quality monitoring system over here in surveillance, where there are a number of companies creating these systems. And those do work, but they are typically retrospective. So you can sample the air in the morning, you'll maybe get a result in the afternoon, but more likely get a result the next day. So what's key there is that would tell you aggressively test everybody in that classroom. There are very few systems that adequately and accurately look at the air and can monitor it in real time. So I hope that answered the question for Rhonda. Rhonda, you asked about portable ones, so I think I answered that, but we can come back to it. So these three are tougher, particularly masking. And given masking has been such an issue, you probably know this, but you know, the CDC said guidance for fully vaccinated, including non-vaccinated and fully vaccinated, is that everybody is masked. So where do we stand with the country on this? Well, if you look at the country, what you see is almost equal, just under 25% of states where masks are required, another 25% where masks are banned, or mask mandates are banned. The masks themselves aren't banned. There are a lot of fights about this now. I'm from Arizona. The governor banned a mask mandate. Many local districts are now saying, sue us, we're going to have a mask mandate. So each state is different, and I'm sure everybody has different thoughts about this, but I wanted to give you the state of the country today. About 50% have no mask mandate and allow school districts with local flexibility. And New Mexico right now is saying that it depends on the status and local districts can do it. So essentially it's a little bit different, but it's really similar to the 50%. So that gives you a state. So when I look at it, I say, do all the mitigations you can, but testing remains critical to supplementing the mitigation strategies, 1, 2, or 0. So how do I talk about testing? And I call it confirmation. Before I discuss it, I'd love to know your thought. If there were testing in the school, would it increase your confidence level? Great, thank you. This one's interesting. We didn't hit that 85%. We're at 75%, and we got many more people to say unsure. I'm not surprised by this. I'll describe a little bit about testing today, and then I'd love to know why people are unsure and what could be done to make you more sure or not. So first, it's all about choosing the right testing strategy. And I won't go through these in detail, but you're probably familiar with this, but it's all about the test sensitivity, test specificity, frequency, time to result, logistics, and cost. If nothing else, I'll tell you cost should not be a big issue because of the federal monies available. We'll go through that. Sensitivity, you're probably aware, but sensitivity is all about the false negative rate. So in everything, you want it at 100%, but it probably doesn't exist. There is no perfect test. There is no perfect treatment. You do the best that we can with the great technologies that we have today. Test specificity is the number of false positives. So most schools and most people are very comfortable with a test that has the highest sensitivity, so you don't end up with a false negative. But it's also concerning to have false positives because you don't want to send somebody home that truly does not have COVID. What's nice now is the testing is easier, more available, cheaper, and faster. So even if you need to retest because people are skeptical of the result, that's possible. So when you think about testing, I wanted to give you the sense of what are all the testing options. You've probably heard these terms, molecular or PCR testing. It's mostly PCR. You could do rapid or on-site, but most of the testing is lab testing. Most is pooled or individual. Results are back in 24 to 48 hours, but for schools, it really should be with all the participants of the program that I'm with, and I know from Thermo, really, it should be 24 hours. Antigen tests are the other kind of tests, and here, the predominant way to do it is on-site with something called a lateral flow. And if you haven't seen it and we have time and questions, I can show you how a test works and what it looks like. And those test results are back in less than 30 minutes. So once you decide that, how does it work? And again, you can read these offline, but the key is coordination and administration. And for any school, they've got to be working with the PTA. They have to be working with parents to do this well. Then you select your modality, have the facility set up. Virtually all the time, there is virtually no setup. I wanted to mention this because it's a level of high anxiety, but it's very easy to set up a school to do it. But then the more tough question is how you do results reporting. And I would tell you, rely on your lab partner to help do this. But you also want to set up procedures that the parents are comfortable with when there's a positive. If it's your kid, if it's a kid in your kid's classroom, or if it's 3 grades above or below your child, having that results communications and reporting set up at the beginning is critical. So does testing work? This was a model put together by the Mathematica group supported by the Rockefeller Foundation. And what it showed was weekly testing, which is what we're recommending, can reduce school infections by 50%. And what's interesting is this didn't matter if the school was having 1% positive tests or 3% positive tests. It reduced the in-school infections significantly. And in our study, we also asked the same questions, just like you did. I shouldn't say our study, but the studies that were given to me, does it increase confidence? Very similar to our answers here. It does. We looked at pre-launch and post-launch and people being open to testing. In Wellesley, Massachusetts, and this was done in the second surge, but teachers were not confident going back to school. At the worst of this in Massachusetts, they went from 10% confidence to 82%. Parents were more confident at 35%, and they went up to 84% post-testing. So testing, when it works, can increase confidence. But you say, oh my God, if we're testing, how many positives are going to be? Well, we looked at rural, urban, and suburban schools. I'm going to show 2 of them here and tell you verbally one of them. New York City, 0.5% positive in schools. The community was 5.6%. Colorado, also 0.5 amongst teachers. Adults in the state was 4%. 2 weeks ago, I met with the team in El Paso, Texas. They were at a 10% positivity rate in June. They had a summer session. and the schools were at 1% positive. So we continue to see the school prevalence 10x lower than the community rates, but still we want to know. So does it work? Not going to read these, but just to give you an example, Massachusetts schools, 4 different vendors, it's working. Baltimore, 2 different vendors, working. Delaware public schools. Delaware schools are interesting. They're actually using an instrument-based system, somewhat unique. California schools working all across the state. Nationwide PCR pooling working. Minnesota, a very different district. This is a more unique approach. They're using a saliva test to get answers. So it's not a nasal swab, it's a saliva swab. And then this happens to be with Thermo Fisher, but I'm proud to share it because it's an example of all the examples I have of it testing working. They're working with 35 schools on the Ready, Check, Go program. And the pilot schools were challenging schools. I wanted to include this. This is my nationwide presentation, but this was a very interesting one because these were students with some challenges at the School of the Deaf and Blind, and they were able to do the testing on a very simple and fast basis. So does testing work? This just came out of the UK 2 weeks ago in high schools, and all of these high schools had an index student, one student who was positive. And what we said was, what they said is compare the control group to the intervention group. Control group had 10 days quarantine. The intervention had daily antigen tests. And you know what the results were? Oops, sorry. 40% fewer days lost for students, 61% fewer days lost for staff. Big deal with testing works. So I'm going to end right now to say there are many federal funding options. The one that we're talking about today that gives the schools the most flexibility is over here, $10 billion. And the funding does not stop until July 22. You will, when we send this to you, you can look at your state, but states have tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. And what's important here is 85% are used for material of this money, 15% for coordination, and new as of last week, monies can be used according to the federal government, but the states have to do their own programs for family and community testing and for ventilation systems. So this is critical. So with that, my summary is, unfortunately, no vaccine is perfect. We don't know how long they last. We're now saying 8 months. Non-vaccinated, not everybody will be vaccinated, certainly kids. Mutations will occur, so that regular testing is essential to avoid the outbreaks. So with that, there are some links that we'll send you in the deck, and I send it over to you, Rachel.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mara. That was incredibly informative and a lot of really good information there about what's the current state of everything and the value of testing. So I'm Rachel Formosa. I lead our market development around our coronavirus testing solutions at Thermo Fisher. We have been developing tests for coronavirus for COVID-19 over the past year and a half. And we've supplied a very large amount of the world with coronavirus tests. So I wanted to talk a little bit today about implementing testing program in schools and what our program looks like for that. So if you go to the next slide, just to follow up with what Mara was saying on the background here, the testing landscape for schools is actually very positive. There's good news for schools in that it's pretty straightforward to establish a testing program. So there is funding available, as Mara indicated. There are also guidelines that have been established, the National Testing Action Plan for K-12 schools, that provides a really solid set of guidelines for doing testing in schools to make that easier on schools being able to set these up. And then Mara also mentioned this, the innovation around the testing. As a testing company, Thermo Fisher, we've really had to evolve over the past year and a half and ensure that we're developing tests that are accurate, that are as fast as possible, taking accuracy into account, and really being able to put these into an overall solution to make it easy, especially for things like school testing. So if you go to the next slide, this really talks about, there's kind of two pieces in terms of the importance of testing. One is the implementation and one is the accuracy of results. So Mara talked already a little bit about the accuracy, which is really the sensitivity and specificity of the test. And you can have two different situations that, especially in a school environment, can be detrimental. One is false negative results, which means that you have somebody who is positive for COVID-19 but tests negative, which means that they would continue infecting people around them potentially. And then you also have false positives, which is where somebody has tested positive, but they're not. And in that case, they may be quarantined unnecessarily. The group around them may also be quarantined. So we really want to avoid both of these situations, which is why it's very important to have accurate testing. And the other piece is, even when you have an accurate testing program, it needs to be as minimal of disruption to the classroom as possible, from the implementation up front to really making sure that it's not disrupting the classroom. So we've taken these into account when we've built our program. So if you go to the next slide, I wanted to talk a little bit about our program, and you can go to the next one. We have developed a K-12 testing program, the Ready, Check, Go program, which is in conjunction between Thermo Fisher and Color Health. And this is really an end-to-end solution that takes care of really all the steps of the process of setting up a program. So if you go to the next slide, there are a number of considerations here. As Mara said, it's actually relatively easy and straightforward to set up a program, but there's certainly some components that we can make even easier, which is what we have aimed to do here. So, setting up a program initially, there is kind of the initial determination, as Mara said, in terms of the modality of testing that you'll undertake, as well as then how to just implement that program, across the school or across the district. So the administration of the program, parental consent and registration, setting up testing stations within the school and within the classroom, and then the logistics around setting, doing the testing, and then sending those tests out to labs and receiving and reporting the results back in. So Ready, Check, Go is really an end-to-end solution that takes care of all of those components to, again, make testing really easy to set up in a school and in a facility. So one of the things I wanted to talk about specifically is that a lot of people have a concern, especially parents, and me being a parent myself, have a similar concern around basically the comfort of being able to do the testing. And if you've had to go take a COVID test, you may have had to take a test with a long swab. These are very uncomfortable. I know my daughters, who are 10 years old, they're twins, when I took them in to get testing after they were exposed at school last year, there was a lot of tears that were involved in that, but this is one of the areas that we've made a lot of advancements in. Now the swabs that we use are short swabs, so they're basically the size of a Q-tip. They just go on the inside of the nostril as opposed to going all the way up. So this is testing that can be easily implemented be done by students themselves as well as by the staff. So we have a little short video here next. If you go to the next slide and just press play on this, that shows you how simple it really is to implement testing. So in this case, we have a testing station set up in the classroom, just right on the side. The students go up and they just do the simple swab just inside their nostril. And then essentially those samples get packed up and shipped out. And then the results are reported back anywhere from 12 hours to 2 days, depending on where the lab is that we're doing the testing at in conjunction to the school. So it can be implemented quickly. These are PCR-based tests, either done in a pooling fashion or individually. And so these can be done in the most accurate gold standard testing that's available is done through these tests. We also have on-site options as well. So we really tried to cover all of the different modalities and essentially just use the same process in order to be able to, cover the whole testing process from end to end. So we wanted to save some time for discussion. If you go to the next slide, if there is additional information that you're looking for or that you're interested in, on the next slide here, we just have a QR code that you can scan, and we can definitely provide you more information on this, but wanted to make sure that we had some time here to be able to answer questions that you have, concerns that you have, anything that you're seeing specifically within your school or within your district. Wanted to open it up for discussion. And Krista, I don't know if you've seen any questions coming through that you want to cover. Otherwise, if people want to come off mute and ask questions, we're happy to address those.
Yeah, we haven't seen anything yet. Mara addressed a few of them that was in the upfront, so we can give everyone a few more a few more minutes here if they want to just post again. Not specific to Rachel, it could be for something earlier that Mara chatted about. So anything that even something we didn't cover that you'd like some more information on, happy to help out there too. So yeah, just to encourage everyone to post anything that they have into the chat box.
Okay, were we that clear and answered all of your questions? I'll ask a question that I've heard. Oh no, Jennifer has a question. I'll pose.
How do we get districts to understand how important testing is and that they need to implement a plan?
Rachel, you want to take it first? You want me to take it?
I think, Mara, you're probably very good to answer that, but I think even a lot of the information that was shared here that Mara shared in terms of, some of the studies that have been done that have shown that a testing program really works would be really helpful to share with districts. Mara, you may have additional to add to that.
No, I think that's right. I mean, quite frankly, that's part of what we're doing today. And I'm doing several of these a week in different groups. So while I can't offer this to everybody, this is a really VIP and small group. If you have a district where you want people to learn, contact me, contact the Thermo Fisher people, and we can do something in a customized short way. I think the second piece that's in the slides, and we can send them out, right? You can go to a place called the Ready, Set, Go site for sure. And you can go to Open and Safe Schools, which has a lot of information, or the Rockefeller Foundation K-12 playbook. Any of those sites are really useful. Maybe we could put some of them in the chat that will describe the science behind it, as well as the logistics. So I hope that answers your question. One of the perceptions when I speak to a lot of school districts, what do I hear? I hear it's expensive, but we talked about the importance and the fact that there is money available in every state. Secondly, but you do have to work through your Department of Education to get that money, or Department of Health. Secondly, I hear that it's going to take up a lot of time. Teachers don't want to be medical professionals. I get that, but I think, as you saw in the video, all of the systems work incredibly easily. And Rachel mentioned it. A lot of people perceive it's that back of the nose thing. It isn't. It is just like a Q-tip in the front of the nose, and literally takes less than 30 seconds per kid. So most schools, and I would recommend doing it at the beginning of the day, it's easy to do. And lastly, I get a lot of people ask, or Justine, I'm going to get to your question in a minute. A lot of people ask, do the tests really work? Are they accurate? The answer there, I can't emphasize enough, which is the tests work. They work against Delta. They work. Are they perfect? No. Might you get 1 in 100 that's a false negative and false positive? You might. It's not likely, but you might. But if you didn't test, then that falls, then you would miss all the others. So it's just like vaccines and therapies. We don't say we're not going to take a fever reducer because it may not work all the time. We try in a safe way. So the question that I see here from Justine about logistics are too hard. It is true that kids have to take off their masks to do it. There are a couple of ways you can deal with that. For schools that have mostly carpools, students can do the swabbing in the carpool lane. And that's one option. In the fall, when it's not too cold and typically not too hot, students can do their swabbing outside and somebody is there to do it. What's nice about the federal money, and virtually every state that's using the federal money allows you to use that money for staff. You can use that money to hire somebody to coordinate the program beyond what Thermo or others do, somebody from your team who could be there to help coordinate. Some districts are using parents to do it, but they're paying them, so it's not a volunteer system. So those are some of the options. Certainly using Purell and PPE to do it. If kids certainly should, as I get ready to touch my face, which I'm trying to learn not to do, after they swab, they should use Purell right there, and the money takes care of that. So I would say the logistics, once you get it set up, are relatively easy to do. And the reality is, unless the kid's sneezing, once you do a swab and put it into a container and seal it, there's very low risk, even if that person's positive. So Rachel, sorry I went on a bit, but.
No problem. I was just going to also, reinforce that when we set up testing in the classroom, the process is that they sanitize their hands with hand sanitizer, then do the swab, pull down their mask just momentarily, do the swabbing on each side, pull back up their mask, sanitize their hands again, and done. So, from that process, it's pretty straightforward, doesn't require necessarily hand washing before and after, as long as they're sanitizing their hands at the station. But agree, there are a number of different ways that that testing can be implemented to try to streamline the process.
Awesome. We have a few more specific to testing from Jennifer. Do you ever have parents that want to decline testing for their child, and how do we handle that?
So for our program specifically, there is an opt-in that parents need to do. And so that right now things really vary state by state, but it's essentially a voluntary program. So people opt in to do the testing unless it's been mandated in their particular area. And so we have a lot of efforts to, again, drive awareness and increase opt-in rates, but parents do have the option, as long as testing is optional in their area, to opt out.
And from a different Jennifer, how often would testing need to occur to be effective? In my mind, I envision testing every morning. It would be ready in 5 minutes, and then nobody has to wear a mask that day. And can leave and come back. Am I crazy?
Oh my gosh. It's okay. I'll start with that one. Jennifer Wolf, no, you're not crazy. And that is the overused term Holy Grail. Francis Collins talked about it, that it would be something that stamp that you lick when you brush your teeth in the morning, and that you would know whether you're positive or not. There are actually some technologies that might get there, but they're pretty expensive now and not good enough to be useful. I know we were hoping that fever might be that you can, check your temperature in the morning, but only about a third of people get a fever, including a presentation to the emergency room. So that doesn't work. If you have a fever, you should be more concerned, but if you don't, it doesn't mean you're free and clear. There are some new tests called CRISPR tests, which are similar to a molecular test, but they're still in process. They're talking about a saliva-based one that would be 2 minutes, but it's not clear what the cost is. So I would say you're definitely not crazy. And that's what people are working on. The technology, my confidence level, the technology will get there. I'm at 9 out of 10. The timing, I don't know. And my biggest worry is the cost of making those tests. Forget making any profit, just the cost of doing the test may be so hard. It's very difficult for everybody to be doing it every day. But if we had it at the beginning of the pandemic, it'd be a whole lot better than treating old people and the unfortunate deaths. So I hope we get there. And I hope that if we ever have to do something, if we ever have anything like this in the future, we will have that technology.
We had one coming in from Maggie. Mara, this probably relates more to what the funding does and doesn't cover. But the question was, could federal funding cover both testing and an air filtration improvement system?
So the answer is yes. And that was just changed on August 10th. The federal funding allows it to be all of those. You can, it's sort of a menu. You could say, I want to do testing. I need PPE. I have to hire somebody to coordinate, and we want to put in new ventilation. However, this program that we're talking about today, as Rachel talked about, the $10 billion program, and that I went through the numbers, is implemented by each individual state. So the federal program allows that. Each state then makes rules as to how it would work. So that's the best I can do as an answer. You have to contact your state to make sure that they would allow to do it and how it would work. And the change on ventilation only happened, 1 week ago today on August 10th.
I know we have some time. I don't see any other questions. We have a few more minutes if anyone has any last minute comments, questions, thoughts. Okay. Otherwise, Carolyn, should I turn it back over to you?
Sure. I'll just say that this is a recorded session. It will be available on pta.org/learning labs. And we'll send out a follow-up email to all registrants with information from Thermo Fisher for all of the great information that they shared today, as well as their slide deck. So thank you all for attending.
Thank you. And thanks for all the wonderful questions. Really appreciate the engagement from everyone.
And if we can take one more second just on Jennifer's question about the PTA needs to be involved. I've seen it if it's okay, I've seen it most effectively work where the PTA, just as you're doing today, allows the exchange of information, and that district and the PTA leaders in an individual area can share that information in a transparent way. I suspect not everybody will agree on everything, but having that information from independent sources can help, and opening up the discussion. And then what a lot of school districts have done who have been hesitant initially about testing is they used it for test to play. They used it just for athletes, or they used it just for high risk classrooms, or they used it just for after school programs. And that has become easy enough, logistically enough, that they then expand it. So if you're in a school district and you and other parents want to test and this district is not so sure, I would personally say, don't think of it as an all or nothing. You could start with a piece of it and then add to it as people get comfortable.
We're good, Caroline.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much for attending.
Thank you.
And thank you,
Bye.
Rachel and Mara.
Thank you.